Today let's talk about British fantasy writing of the first half of the 20th century. Some of these works have become among the most popular books ever written. I'm thinking here of T.H. White's The Once and Future King, my personal favorite of all fantasy novels. JRR Tolkien's Middle-earth books, especially The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, which primarily written in the 30s and 40s. These books have had, just scads of people read them. They've been made into major movies or TV shows, or sometimes both. They are touchstones for readers everywhere. People who haven't read the books are usually as familiar with some basic concepts from them, like the names of the worlds and some of the characters. And they've just become, hugely influential works of fiction. I spoke about T.H. White's Once and Future King in an earlier one of these, and what I love about that, I just want to go over briefly to contrast with the other two. And what I love about the Once and Future King is that it is overtly written from the point of view of a person in the 20th century. There's none of this. It's like delving into the medieval past of the book with the eye towards the values and challenges of the 20th century, and using those medieval characters to show commonalities of struggle with the 20th century, to show similar difficulties and quandaries that afflict people in different times and places. And I love that the central impetus of the book is the struggle against war. What drives the book is a notion that King Arthur comes to, that war is wrong. This is after World War I, when T.H. White was growing into adulthood, pacifism was probably a more successful philosophy and political stance internationally than it had ever been. And White would have been familiar with this, and the question of why do we war is raised openly in Once and Future King many times. So Arthur gets this idea to use his monarchical power against war rather than simply extending his realm. He's going to create a new ethic and recruit people to his banner specifically to change the nature of war and to sort of lift its burden off of humanity's shoulders. How he gets to this realization and how it plays out is, the book. He spends hundreds of pages learning to this realization, and then he spends hundreds more trying to put it into practice. And the characters, although this is, long ago, they often think and speak like 20th century people. So it's a big jumble of a book. I really love it. Portions of it are beautiful, especially the portions to do with the natural world. Arthur learns from animals, through magic, from that he gets from Merlin, to help him understand how the world works and what kind of life humans should be, what kind of animals are we, who should we emulate, and who should we be repelled by and avoid. It's just a beautiful work. Now, one reason that it is probably less popular than the other two is it's just one big book. It is divided up into sections which are occasionally read separately, but it's just one giant book. And it is a book that sort of draws connections and offers no easy answers to its problems. Arthur struggles deeply with the sort of ethical innovation that he's trying to bring into the world. And he does not completely succeed. Other characters important in the book, like Lancelot and Guinevere, suffer deeply. It's not. It is not the kind of book that sort of sets up its terms in order to sort of bring everything to a solution of some kind, which then has a pleasant resolution. It is challenging. It's asking questions right up until the very end of the book. It's tragic. It's comic. It's written in somewhat of a kind of like a confusing and messy way at times. I don't always know what's going on in the latter couple hundred pages, for example, just generally speaking, who is aiming at what. And it's despondent at times. White's characters really doubt that the journey that they've gone on is even a good idea, or that trying to be decent and to sort of build an ethic that's better than what they were born into is worth it, or even feasible, if they haven't just sort of borrowed a lot of trouble that they didn't need to. I think that's one reason. It's not a nice rounded off reading experience. The questions tug at you, or at least they do if you take them seriously. They tug at you. There are moments of glory and transcendence in the book, though, and it's important to remember that. It has kind of the breadth of life itself in that book, like the moods, the aging. Arthur starts as a boy, ends as an old man. The challenges, the other people sometimes letting you down, lack of trust, unnecessary pain and misunderstanding. It's all there. It's a very good book. Contrasted with, let's just go with Lord of the Rings and Tolkien generally for now. Contrasted with this, much more popular book. Once and Future King does fine, but Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are really something special in terms of their appeal to people. I think it's safe to say that these are rounded off books, and more than that they ask simpler and more straightforward questions, because the general tone of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is either to restore or protect a status quo, whereas in Once and Future King it's pretty clear that the status quo, when the book begins, is kind of awful. That the feudal world of knights and lords given sort of like free reign to do violence to those beneath them is it's not unlimitedly awful, but it's kind of awful. Whereas in Tolkien, the world of the Shire, which is the sort of the main sort of psychological world that the main characters come from, is presented as basically being perfect. It's basically great. There's nothing wrong with the Shire. Everybody sort of feels like nobody is there are people who are a little poorer and a little richer, and there's social squabbling, but there's basically no government. There are no outside threats. They're dealt with by other people. The hobbits pretty much get along with a lot of gossip and snooting about particular families, but basically they all get along. Everyone tends to do okay. Children are loved. They give people presents on their birthdays. It's just kind of a great world. And the basic premise is, how do we protect this world from an external threat? Not how do we fix what's wrong with it, which is a very difficult, challenging question, but simply, how do we preserve this? So we find in Lord of the Rings, which I'm pretty much just going to talk about Lord of the Rings because it's the bigger book that has more seriousness about it. I personally love The Hobbit because it's more of a lighthearted adventure, sort of more of an episodic, fairy tale kind of structure, and makes great bedtime reading, and there's lots of just random wonderful little details. But Lord of the Rings is the one that's got sort of more deeper serious themes, more political and psychological links to real world stuff. And the basic premise I want to say here is T.H. White was interested in making the world better, and believes that that is possible, although perhaps intrinsically flawed, and of course extraordinarily difficult, and the people who try to do it pay a very high price, but he believes that it is possible. JRR Tolkien's characters generally believe that the world is as good as it can be already and needs to be protected from becoming worse. So the one begins from a position that the world is lacking and needs to be improved. That's T.H. White, Once Future King. The other begins with this world is as good as it can get already and needs to be protected from becoming worse. There is a general trend, if you look at Tolkien's world, Middle Earth, if you look at like the deeper stuff, there is a general trend for things to just keep getting a little bit worse. Things started out perfect in the cosmology of Middle Earth. Life was just one long harmony, and then the world came into being, and the beings were people that were beautiful and ageless, and as new elements of the world came to be, everything started to sort of break and crack and crumble. This should sound familiar to people who believe in, say, original sin, or the expulsion from paradise, or humanity's fall from Eden, or any of these other classic versions of myths that explain why the world is not all that it could be. And these are not repairable. The world once broken is not, in Tolkien's universe, it can't be improved. It was perfect, and now it's broken, and there's a sort of somber beauty about it's struggling on in its within its flaws and its failures, a sort of evanescent, sad thing. But basically, you're trying to the extent that characters can, they want to return to a world that was already achieved. They want to protect the world from getting worse, but there's no sense that it could be made better than it was at the start. I bring this up because I think it's a really, really, this is an extraordinarily important point in a given life or in a given society is, do you think that the world can be better than it is now? Do you think that the way we live now is as good as it can be, basically, and simply needs to be protected from getting worse? Or do you think that the way we live now is lacking and flawed and needs to be improved? Your answer to those questions and which fields you allot them will determine a great deal else of what you think of more sort of specific boots on the ground issues. If you think, for example, that the world is basically as good as it can get, you might be less inclined to support researching new technologies or new understandings of nature which might lead us to live better. If you think that the world is lacking and needs to be improved, you might discount the achievements that have kept the world, at least somewhat decent, and you might be inclined to discount the value of long-lasting institutions and long-lasting ethical principles in the rush to find something better. These are like foundational questions that often, build up to an individual's specific politics or their specific attitudes towards, fundamental questions of their lives. Um, I see Lord of the Rings as a fundamentally conservative book, but it's one that is so carefully composed that it can be enjoyed by many, many people, um, regardless, even if they don't agree with its fundamentally conservative attitude, because it is distant enough from contemporary concerns to be enjoyed purely as escapism. But still, if you look at the world of Middle Earth, you find a number of very conservative, backwards-looking, status quo protecting principles. You find this basic cosmology where the world was perfect once and now it is broken and flawed. You find characters who are fundamentally, generally disinterested in. They're always looking back. They're never looking forward. When they look forward, it's only to restore the glories of the past. One of the most common things in Lord of the Rings is for a character to stop and look at something and think back to how great it was once and how they wish it could be that way again. Boromir wishing to restore the glory of Gondor as it was. There's scenes in Moria where Gimli is remembering the great glories of Moria in its heyday, when it was the place to be if you were a dwarf. It was more than just a mine. It was this whole kingdom and this whole world of grandeur and glory, and now it's all gone. I think there's a phrase for this. It's just called, from Latin, I think it's called ubi sunt, which means where are they? It's that attitude where you look back and you go, where are they? Where are those great men, those men of the West? Where are those wonders? The Ents. Where are the Entwives? There are no Entlings. Where did they go? And Gondor's where is the king? Where are they gone? This just suffuses the whole book, that life was great and there were heroes once, but now there's just us. And this principle, this where are they, this sense of being haunted by the greatness of the past, really drives a lot of the characters in the book on a fundamental level. I think it's fair to say that Frodo, for example, is driven at least partly by the example of his uncle Bilbo's earlier adventure as a challenge, a personal challenge to him to sort of step into unknown country and do your best. Aragorn is driven partly by the desire to sort of fulfill the pledge of his house and restore the kingdom of Gondor, and to sort of redeem Isildur's mistake in not destroying the ring at the end of the Second Age. And especially Theoden, who to me might be the most fully realized actual psyche in the book, is Theoden. Theoden, the king of Rohan, who's when we meet him, he's an old man and he's been sort of cursed with doubt and indecision and fear by bad counsel and maybe by Saruman. But then, with the help of better example, he returns to leadership and he regathers his strength and he leads an army to Gondor that arrives in the nick of time to save the day. And at least partly what he's driven by is the desire to show his ancestors that he did not fail them, that he did not fail to live up to the standard of greatness that he feels that they represent. I think it's almost his last words. He's on the field. I guess I should say some spoilers. Spoilers for Lord of the Rings. He's on the field, and he's been mortally wounded, and he's speaking to his niece, and he tells her goodbye. He's I go now to the halls of my fathers, in whose great company I need not now feel ashamed, because he did the thing. He lived up to Rohan's pledge to Gondor. He lived up to the king's pledge to his subjects to lead them in battle directly and to sort of fulfill the fealty oaths that you have to your kinsmen and to your people. It's quite touching, and it's something that even if you do believe that the future can be better than the past, and that the present is better than the past in some ways, life is the temptation to look back and see the great achievements of the past just as the great achievements is very, very strong. Um, the villainy and just the usual crap and just like the random garbage that filled life of the past. It is easy to like ignore that. It kind of gets washed out by the passage of time. It's easy to only see the great stuff. You just look at like the fugues of Bach and you forget like the savage whipping and death penalty stuff of his time. You just look at the beautiful churches that were built during like the Dutch Golden Age, and you don't see all the murder and slaughter in the East Indies that built the money to pay for the churches. Things like this. So it's very, very powerful stuff, this ubi sunt that suffuses the book. The other thing that seduces, the other thing that seduces Lord of the Rings. Oh, baby. The other thing that suffuses Lord of the Rings is a couple pretty basic ethical principles that have really broad appeal to anybody, that sort of like go beyond these kind of like attitudinal questions that we're talking about. One is you stand by your friends and you keep your promises. So, the hobbits here are the ones I'm thinking of. The hobbits in The Lord of the Rings are the most fully developed actual characters. I tend to find everybody else a little bit flat these days. I've read Lord of the Rings a lot. I've read it out loud. I've seen the movies, blah, 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 blah. And of the main characters, only the hobbits really stay as like distinct, unique individuals in my mind. So many of the rest of the characters just don't get the time or the development. They're not like unrealistic or bad people, but they're just kind of like, they're just flat, they're not like, we don't find out what kind of king Aragorn is going to be, like he doesn't have any thoughts about the proper methods of leadership. Gandalf is just a grouchy old cuss. Legolas and Gimli are just flat ciphers who barely express anything except loyalty to their groups and to Aragorn. Faramir is kind of interesting, and Theoden is kind of interesting, honestly. Those two characters, especially Faramir nowadays, kind of leaps out at me as really kind of interesting in his own right. I would like to see more of his life. But the hobbits are pretty distinct, and it's because they are not trying to be Wagnerian heroes or these kind of like larger than life Viking saga type people. They're like rooted, grounded people, especially Sam and Merry and Pippin. Frodo, one of the things that makes the book work, I'll just throw this out there, I think, is that we find out Frodo, to me, is a little mysterious. His decisions are... He's very self-sacrificing. He's sort of like a pilgrim. He's very brave. But we don't really share his state of mind very often. Like, if you had to describe Frodo, if you had to say what he thought about different things, you would have I think you would struggle. He loves Bilbo. He loves the Shire. He is very self-sacrificing. He was going to go alone because he didn't want to put any of his friends in danger. His instinct is to take all these burdens on himself and carry it to help others. It's great, but where did he get this from? Why does he act this way? What specifically does the ring tempt him with? We get a touch of how the ring tempts Sam during that brief period when Sam was carrying the ring. And we sort of can see the destruction it wrought on Gollum's character. But what actually is going on inside of Frodo as he carries the ring? We occasionally see the burden it places on him. That he gets angry at Sam. It's overwhelming his natural decency, which is, very, very strong. But we don't see specifically what it is. And I think that's part what makes the book work, is that the threat of the ring is not too easily viewed. Frodo hides it even from the reader a little bit, and we're left to imagine it. He describes it now and then of what's happening, where he can, like, it's like, when he's in Mordor and, like, he can see the great eye of Sauron all the time, even in his waking life. He's like being thinned out and made empty. It's very compelling, but if we knew too much about Frodo as a character, it might be less ominous and mysterious. Anyway, back to the characters. So you got this stand by your friends thing and keep your promises. Frodo stands by Gandalf. He takes a lot of action in the dark, leaving the Shire without hearing from Gandalf about this, trying to get away. His friends stand by him, and they form this kind of quiet little conspiracy to get away from the Shire without the riders catching them, and to stand by Frodo, wherever he may go. We don't really find out why they have such a deep bond. They just do. That's just what they're like. It's part of what makes the Shire kind of a perfect place, is the friendships here are kind of like, naturally just deep and warm-hearted, and sticky. Sam just sticks by Frodo and would never think of leaving him. There's probably some classism in there, but let's not get distracted. But that's one of the deep lessons, is, you stick by your friends and you keep your promises. So, the Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, running, for days without sleep to try to catch up to Merry and Pippin when they've been captured by the Uruk-hai. Everyone showing up in the nick of time with the force that, is just barely enough to help them survive a given battle, because they would never think of, turning sides or leaving their enemies at the lurch. Excuse me. This is really appealing. I mean, a lot of people want to experience this. I would say even in their own lives. I think this is often what drives people to join communities that have risk, even dumb risk, is because it gives them the chance to display the kind of loyalty and courage in the face of danger that they want to know. They want to know what that feels like. They want to show the people who they care about that they care about them, and so they will, be like, you're not going, to that party without me. I got to be there to make sure that we're okay. Or is that a good example? I think it's clear what I'm trying to say. It's a big appeal of the book. The other is this keep doing your duty even when all is lost. This is a major theme of Lord of the Rings, and of course it leads up to some of the most famous passages of the book. But essentially it's, that it doesn't matter how outnumbered we are, it doesn't matter how little chance we have, we're going to carry on, and we're going to do our job. So the last time I read the book, for example, I was quite moved by the scene when they have temporarily saved Gondor and defeated Sauron's first army, but he's got a lot more to throw at them, and they decide that they need to give Frodo a better chance to take the Ring to Mount Doom. And in order to do that, they're going to lead an attack on Mordor itself, so that Sauron will pay more attention to them and perhaps not notice, Frodo's sneaking the ring into the fire. So they form an army, and they make a banner, and Aragorn is leading them, and they are going to attack the Black Gate and basically, sacrifice themselves. It's a suicide mission, and it's the kind of culmination of the themes of the book, which are, they begin with, people leaving the fight, elves just like leaving to go to the west rather than continuing to struggle over the fate of Middle Earth. Small-minded people in the Shire and Bree have no conception of what's happening and no interest in helping, and it's this minority, solid minority of people who are going to, pick up the fight. When Gondor needs to be defended, when Minas Tirith is about to be besieged, they put out the call for help to all their other all the other like little lords of Gondor and such. And you would think that everybody would ride to the cause, right? That they would get that if Minas Tirith falls, it's just a matter of time until it's them. But they don't. They only send a small number of sort of a token force to support the city, just a few thousand, when, this is in the book overtly, when the Minas Tirith folks had wished for much, much more. And you get the sense there of, like kind of the fractured nature of the land and how much the king needs to return, and how even Gondor isn't Gondor anymore because they don't know how to hang together, and Denethor is under attack by Sauron, and all of this, psychically kind of like Theoden making. Anyway, naturally, this will all eventually build into the just genuine, flat out, we are doomed kind of mission, but we are doomed for a purpose. And we are going to stick it out. We are going to do it for duty, for country, for love, for friendship. Who doesn't respond, at least in the safety of a novel, to this kind of appeal to your courage? I want to go, yeah. Because stuff is clearer here than in real life. I mean, Sauron is an inhuman monster, and his army is full of monsters, and it's clear that you are genuinely in a fight with pure evil here. And who doesn't want to think that if it came to that, you wouldn't worry about odds? You would just recognize that this needed to be confronted and defeated if possible, and you just had to do everything that you could. Everyone wants to feel that they would do that. And so a few of these appeals, these are, I think, the three core strengths of Lord of the Rings, are three major appeals that are played out across a vast, fun, convincing, well-established world. And they are appeals that can really cross all sorts of boundaries that would normally restrict, like, the fictional appeal of such an adventure. You've got the stick to it even against great odds. You've got the keep your promises and back up your friends, and you've got the ubi sunt, looking back at the greatness of the past and letting it inspire you to defend the present. Now, what do you lack? What is not in Lord of the Rings? There's almost nothing of love, and there's literally nothing of sex. This is not a thing. Doesn't happen. Perhaps this is why the book is perennially popular with younger people. Oh, hang on one second. So, no love, no sex to be spoken of. You do not get ideas. This is not a struggle over specific ideas of how the world should be. This is like a struggle over raw power. Sauron has no ideology. He's just a totalitarian monster looking to dominate all within his sway. And his opponents are not ideological. They are driven by deep personal loyalties to actual people, as well as to, like, their lands and their kin and their race. So, the Lothlorien does not raise the banner of, like, free thought against Sauron. They raise the banner of Lothlorien itself and their loyalty to, like, Galadriel and Celeborn, specific places with specific leaders and specific people. And this is brought out in the book time and time again. Theoden, for example, when he decides to answer Gondor's call for aid in Return of the King, he has a weapons gathering. He sends out the word that they'll be gathering an army, and it's not a draft. It's just like volunteers. That's important because it's made clear in the story Sauron's army are unwilling and they hate each other. They're like draftees. But everyone opposing them on some level asked to be there. They're all volunteers. And Theoden gathers as many as he can, and when he's waited out, they ride off. there's no question of like reaching a certain quota or gathering up everybody of any age and making them come. It's just those who will answer my banner are those who will go. That's it. There's also an important moment for what I'm talking about. It's not such a vital moment, I suppose, in the book, but I thought it was really neat that it was there. When Aragorn and Gandalf and everyone is riding off to the Black Gate to distract Sauron from Frodo's secret little quest, they have, small force, just enough to be plausible, and some of the guys, their sort of their courage and their strength kind of fails them. They can't quite walk into certain death. So Aragorn goes to them and says, "Look, I get it. Listen, some of the orcs who we fought earlier have taken over this little island nearby. Why don't you guys go see if you can beat them off and send them packing? That's like a task that, it's not certain death yet, and it's like suited, it's like fit to your courage." He says something like that. It's still something you can, be proud of later. It's not this kind of like suicide mission, but it's still, what you signed up for, which was to confront darkness. And I think it's partly intended to show Aragorn's, greatness as a leader, but I think it's also partly to underscore again this "we don't want anyone who doesn't want to be here" thing. Better 100 people who have volunteered than 1,000 who aren't sure if they are gonna, be up for this whole battle thing. Tolkien was in World War I, and this might be something coming out of his military experience, and people who certainly know better than me about military work have written and said things like this before. So I'm not, I'm not saying that this isn't a good reaction or a practical reaction to the needs of combat, but I think it also just really, really underscores the people are fighting out of like personal duty to themselves, to their families, to their lords, but they are not interested in ideas in Lord of the Rings. It is not an idea-driven world. People might have ideas, although I can't really think of any character who expresses one. That's a weird thing to say, but now that I do, it's really true. I can't think of anybody in Lord of the Rings who just sits down and shares an idea, even though about how the world works or about what they should do in kind of an abstract level. Everything is just very, very practical. They're even the kind of the people who are framed as being unusually wise or masters of lore or knowledgeable, like Bilbo or Elrond or Gandalf or Denethor, even these people, what makes them so is just their extremely wide acquaintance with actual practical realities, past and present. Like their knowledge of lore is like, once there was this kind of place, and here's where the door is, and if we could just read these runes right. They're not interested in putting together